You're welcome back to Inclusive Africa Conference 2020. I realize that I've been saying good morning only to realize that this is a global conference, which is Afrocentric, and we are on different time zones. So it's good morning, good afternoon, good night, depending on where you're watching us from. Our next speaker needs no introduction. She's Haben Girma, an American disability rights lawyer who advances disability justice and the first deaf-blind graduate of Harvard Law School. Haben is of Eritrean heritage, and she will be sharing her experiences and her views on why digital accessibility is so important for persons with disabilities in Africa and around the world. Haben's session is proudly sponsored by MasterCard Foundation. Do not forget to download or engage your Slido app. Just to remind everybody that the conference access code is hashtag A11YAfrica. Irene Mbarikirika will be joining Haben to facilitate the questions and the interactions.
Thanks, Wanja. I welcome everyone to this session. This is a very, very exciting session for most of us, especially in the disability space, because having Haben has been through her own experience, which she is going to share with everyone, and it will show us that if you have the right tools and resources and a few difficulties here and there, you can still succeed. So I'm very, very excited to invite Haben. Haben was actually supposed to come to Kenya 6 months ago when we were going to host the face-to-face conference. So I'm really happy that she was able to join us today. So Haben, over to you. There are a lot of Africans out there listening to you. So please share your story and I'll be here to support you. Go ahead, Haben.
Thank you, Irene. I'm thrilled to be here virtually, and hopefully one day I'll be able to visit Kenya in person. So for everyone watching, my name is Haben Girma. I will offer a visual description for blind audience members. I'm a woman sitting on a couch in my living room, and I am based in California, in the United States. It's the middle of the night over here, but this conference was so important I was willing to stay up so I can be with everyone here. As you heard, I'm deafblind. I have limited vision and hearing. Deaf blindness is a spectrum, so different types of vision and hearing loss. Some deaf people sign, some rely on text and computers, some use voice. So it's important to remember there's a lot of diversity within the disability community. So for me, for this session, I am using technology to assist with communication. I'm holding up a device, a Braille computer, and there's Braille dots along the bottom. I run my fingers over the dots, and I have an assistant here who's typing what people say. So what Irene was saying, or later the questions that come in, so that I can read them and know what's going on. Then I'm responding back with my own voice. Throughout this session, please send your questions. This is your opportunity to learn and get your questions answered. So you can send in your questions while I'm speaking, and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible. One question people ask me all the time, how do you speak if you're deaf? There's a lot of diversity in the disability community. You're going to hear that a lot. My type of hearing loss is in the low frequencies, so I learned to speak at a higher register. In some communities, people with high frequency voices, like female voices, are not respected and that's not right. We need to build communities where all voices are valued, regardless of whether it's a high register voice, a low register voice, whether they speak with an accent or they sign or use computers to communicate. We need to build communities where all voices are valued. It is people who create communities. Right now, in a lot of communities around the world, there's sexism, ableism, racism, and it's up to communities, people, individuals to call it out and remove this from our communities. Some people are not familiar with the word ableism. Ableism is the assumption that disabled people are inferior to non-disabled people. We're not inferior. That assumption is widespread, and it touches schools, it touches employment, and unfortunately, it gets baked into a lot of our technology. If we can teach more developers to identify ableism, they can remove it from technology so our technology can be more inclusive. I told you earlier that I'm speaking to you now from California. I was born and raised in California. My parents are from Eritrea and Ethiopia. Most people know this, especially at an African conference, but there are some people, especially in the United States, who might not know where Eritrea is. So I will clarify. Eritrea and Ethiopia are in Northeast Africa. The two countries border, and there's been tension for a while. My parents grew up during that tension. And I was very blessed to be able to visit many times when I was growing up. Most recently, I went in 2015 to Ethiopia. And I'm going to share a photo from that. Let's share one of the photos. So we're going to share a photo from my visit in 2015. I visited several schools and met with disability leaders in Ethiopia. And we have a photo from Mekelle University. I'm sitting in front of the classroom, speaking into a microphone in this photo. And beside me, there are women preparing coffee during the presentation at Mekelle University. So I learned a lot from the disability community in Ethiopia and was able to share some more information when I was there. I've also visited Eritrea, and I also visited Mali many years ago. I have encountered many barriers in Africa, in the United States, and in many other countries. Ableism is at the root of a lot of those barriers. When I was growing up, my parents heard from communities, "Oh, poor thing, she'll never go to school, she'll never get a job." That's ableism. The assumption that my life is meaningless because I'm disabled. We had to learn to resist those assumptions, to resist those stories. I had to define for myself what it means to be disabled. The dominant story is disabled people are a burden. I reject that story. I define disability as an opportunity for innovation. If you can't do something one way, you can find another way to do it. Alternative ways are equal in value to mainstream ways of doing things. When it comes to technology, tech should have multiple ways of performing a task. Maybe by voice, maybe by gesture. There should be multiple ways for people to engage with an app or a website or other tool so that it reaches more people and the diversity in the disability community. Disabled people can play a central role for that creation. Disabled people all throughout history have already been innovating and creating new solutions. I'm going to share another video. We have a video of sign language. In this video, a young man is signing. I'm holding my hands over his hands, feeling his signs. This was actually from Mexico when I went to go and visit a school in Sonora, Mexico. Deaf communities all over the world have developed sign languages. There are multiple different sign languages all throughout the African continent. Each community develops their own sign language. If you can't hear spoken language, you can create a visual language. And if you can't hear or see language, you can create a tactile language. And deaf-blind people have been developing tactile languages. And in the video, you're seeing tactile sign language, where I'm feeling signs through my hands. There are many, many different ways to communicate. Tactile sign language is one. I'll show another. Next slide. Another form of communication is dance. We have a video where I'm salsa dancing. I love salsa dancing. I have not done it for months, ever since the pandemic started, because of the need to stay physically distant to minimize spreading the virus. But before the pandemic, I used to go dancing all the time in communities all over the world. When I was growing up, I was told, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. And physical education programs, I would be removed from them because people would assume that I wouldn't be able to participate. Then one summer, I went to a camp for the blind, where they had a blind dance instructor teaching blind students to dance. And there are many different ways to connect with music. A deaf person might be able to see the other dancers. A blind person who can hear the music and respond and engage to the music. As a deaf-blind dancer, I couldn't see the other dancers. I couldn't hear the beat in the music, but I could feel the beat through the hands and shoulders of the people I danced with. There are many, many ways to connect. Tactile connection is something I wish more tech developers would explore. There's a lot of potential for innovation at the intersection of touch and technology. There are many barriers because people aren't removing the barriers. When I've been successful, it's because someone in my life has chosen to help do the work of removing a barrier. I work really, really hard. Lots of disabled people all over the world work really, really hard. But ableism keeps coming up like a brick wall trying to stop us. And we need more people, employers, tech developers to remove these walls. I had an experience like this very early on, way back in high school. And a teacher approached me one day and asked, "Do you want to try surfing?" And I thought to myself, how would a blind person surf? It seemed impossible. But I told her, sure, let's give it a try. So we had a lesson. Video, please. So there's a video of tandem surfing. There's a large tandem board, and two people are on the board. There's a water guide in the back, and I'm in the front. and the water guide is helping to steer as we surf through the water. I loved the experience. I could feel the power of the waves through my feet, through the board. I could feel the water, the sun, the breeze. That's tandem surfing. So you're working with another person to navigate through the water. It's beautiful and fun to engage in tandem activities. But I wondered, what's my limit? What else can I do? Could I surf by myself? So I reached out to surf schools asking if I could take lessons. And they told me, we've never heard of a deafblind surfer. Then I found one school that said, we've never heard of a deafblind surfer, but let's try, let's find a way. So we had a lesson. Next slide. So in this video, I'm on my own surfboard, and that gave me the opportunity to practice standing up and riding the wave on my own. Beside me was an instructor on his own surfboard, and he was able to be nearby and help steer around other surfers and sharks. That was a joke. There weren't any sharks that day. So many people tell me technology is visual. You need to be able to see to use a smartphone or a laptop. That's not true. If a deaf-blind person can learn to surf, tech developers absolutely can make accessible technology. The tools already exist. There are many guides out there for making technology accessible. For websites, it's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. For apps, there's the Android Accessibility Guidelines and Apple iOS Accessibility Guidelines. We need more tech developers prioritizing accessibility rather than treating it as charity. I'm going to pause now and check in with Irene. Irene, how's everyone doing? Do people have questions? Any comments?
Haben, I can hear you. Hold on 1 second and I will check for you. And not yet, so you can proceed and I'll tell you if the questions come in. Actually, one just came in pretty quickly. So, hold on, Haben, one just popped up and the question is, what is your favorite app? And what was it like during your time at Harvard?
Great question at Harvard. I'll get to that. My favorite app is the one that works. It's actually really, really hard to find an accessible app. Many of my friends talk about, oh, this new app came up, or this new app will help you with this. And I try it and it doesn't work. It's not accessible. So we really need more tech developers to design with access in mind, so disabled people can participate and access technology.
Thank you, Haben.
That's all our questions for now, right?
Yes, you can proceed.
Sounds good. I will proceed. So one of the questions was, tell us about Harvard. I did not grow up wanting to go to Harvard or wanting to become a lawyer. That happened. It was a meandering path to Harvard Law School. When I was in college, the college did a really good job providing me with all my books in Braille, and my exams were in Braille. But the menu in the cafeteria was not accessible. There was a print menu, and all the sighted students could walk in, look at the menu, and go to their station of choice. I wasn't really sure what to do. Maybe I should just be grateful that at least I'm allowed to get an education. I know a lot of people struggle to access food around the world. Who was I to complain? My mother, when she was growing up in Eritrea, and then later was a refugee in Sudan and came to the United States, she had many, many struggles. And we're always taught the importance of being grateful, especially disabled people. Everyone's always reminding us to be grateful. So does that mean we never complain? And I should just learn to accept inferior service for the rest of my life. For several months, I didn't do anything about it. I just tolerated the situation. I was a vegetarian back then, and it's hard to eat vegetarian if you don't know which of the stations are serving vegetarian food. There were about 6 different stations. I'd go to a station at random, pick up a plate, find a table, take a bite, and only then would I discover what they were serving. There were quite a few disappointments. But then again, why should I complain? Maybe I should just be grateful and just accept whatever's being offered. I talked to friends and they reminded me, it's my choice. It's our choice to tolerate injustice or advocate for inclusion. I did research. I learned about the Americans with Disabilities Act. After arming myself with research, I went back and talked to the cafeteria manager and I told them, the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination against students with disabilities. If you don't provide access to the menu, I'm going to take legal action. I had no idea how to do that. I couldn't afford a lawyer. Now I know there are nonprofit legal centers helping students with disabilities. But back then I didn't know that. All I knew is I had to try, had to do something. The next day, the manager apologized and promised to make the menus accessible. He started emailing the menus. Finally, I could read what was at the various stations. Go, get food. Life became delicious. The next year, there was a new blind student and he had immediate access to the menus. That taught me when I advocate, I help all the people who come after me. In our world, there are many big barriers. There are also many, many small barriers. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we tell ourselves, oh, just deal with it, just be grateful. Those small barriers add up, and it becomes extremely exhausting to deal with those small barriers over and over again. When you take the time to address the small barriers, you build up the skills to tackle the larger obstacles. I realized that I can make a difference. I can advocate and remove barriers, and I wanted to make that a career. So I started looking into law schools. In 2010, I was admitted to Harvard Law School. They told me they'd never had a deaf-blind student before. I told them I've never been to Harvard Law School before. We didn't know what all the solutions would be, but we engaged in an interactive process to find the solutions and make it work. There are lots of institutions that say, oh, a disabled person has never done this before, therefore you can't come in or you can't do this. Don't be afraid of the unknown. take the time to engage in an interactive process and find solutions and make it work. I studied at law school for 3 years, graduated. Photo, please. And here's a photo from graduation. The Dean of Harvard Law School is handing me a diploma. The Dean and I are wearing academic regalia, and my guide dog is wearing a fancy fur coat. The dog in the photo was trained for many months to guide blind individuals. And when I travel in the United States and other places, my guide dog comes with me and helps navigate around obstacles. So that my guide dog, Maxine, was one of my partners throughout my law school journey. Something you should know about Harvard, they were not always inclusive. I was the first deaf-blind student at Harvard Law School because Harvard had put up barriers for so many years. Other deaf-blind students, like Helen Keller, wanted to go to Harvard, but back then, Harvard only admitted men. So it wasn't Helen's disability that kept her from going to Harvard. It was sexism in the community, denying access to women. Over time, the community changed and opened its doors to women, people of color, and people with disabilities. People sometimes say to me, "You overcame your disability and graduated from Harvard Law School." I'm still disabled. I'm still deafblind. I did not overcome my disability. It was Harvard that overcame ableism, or at least some of it. They still have some work to do. Since then, I've continued advocating as an attorney. For a while, it was through litigation. Then after a few years in litigation, I switched over to consulting and writing and public speaking. Next slide. So people ask, why should they bother making their technology accessible? You reach more people if your tech is accessible. There are over 1.3 billion disabled people around the world. So that's a significant market. You also increase content discoverability. If you add captions and transcripts to videos, if you add image descriptions to photos, more text is associated with your content. Search engine optimization. So more people will find your content, whether disabled or non-disabled. Another compelling reason, disability drives innovation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Organizations that invest in making technology accessible will come up with new, innovative ways for people to engage with technology. I'll give one example. One of the fathers of the internet is Vint Cerf. He's deaf, hard of hearing. And before the internet existed as we know it today, deaf people struggled to communicate long distance. Vint Cerf developed one of the earliest email protocols. Through email, deaf people can communicate long distance without straining to hear over the phone. Guess who else likes using email? Hearing people. Lots of hearing people use email. So if you design for a disability challenge, you could end up building the next big thing, like email. You need to increase hiring of disabled people, disabled engineers, designers. All aspects of your team should be diverse. And when you increase hiring of disabled people, you're more likely to come up with innovative technologies that benefit everyone. I've talked a lot about technology. I want to give an example of what an accessible app looks like. Video, please. So when I'm using my phone, I use VoiceOver. VoiceOver can speak out loud and send information to the digital braille display.
News. Checking for news. National Geographic. Unread. World's largest rodents on lam from Toronto Zoo.
I'm panning right on the braille display using the advanced forward button. If I wanted to instead use hand gestures on the iPhone, I could flick right with one finger. To open an item, I can double tap anywhere on the screen.
Text size. Caption. Title. Title. World's large. Title. After escaping from the High Park Zoo in Canada, 2 capybaras have eluded capture by Jason Biddle. Published June 9. Most people do their best to avoid rodents of unusual size. But after a pair of capybaras escaped from Toronto's High Park Zoo on May alert. Gordon. Hi, I'm at the door. Sushi, pot of food, fish cake with swirl design.
My friend's at the door, so I'm just gonna let him know.
Close. Button. Reply. Button. Messages notification. Hang. In. There. I'm almost done with this demo. Send. Button.
VoiceOver has allowed me to access more information, news, mail, and messages, and it's also a way for me to know when friends are at the door. So the voice speaking was a screen reader, and there are different screen readers on different platforms. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, Android Accessibility Guidelines, and iOS Accessibility Guidelines have instructions on how to make apps and websites accessible. So the news app you saw was a main news app. It wasn't a special app for disabled people. Sometimes tech companies will say, rather than making our app accessible, we'll make a second app for disabled people. Separate is never equal. You might start out with good intentions, but down the line, the disabled app gets fewer resources, fewer updates, and that's not equal. What we want is one app, one service that works for everyone. Another feature about accessibility is captions. The video you saw had captions. Also, this conference has captions. And that helps provide access for deaf individuals, but also helps hearing individuals who are situationally disabled. Maybe the audio is not working. Maybe someone is learning a new language and reading the captions helps. People struggling with Zoom fatigue also benefit from captions. So those are some of the things that help with accessibility. Screen reader compatibility, captions and transcripts for videos. For podcasts, we also want captions and transcripts. We also want support for assistive devices. For example, braille displays, such as the braille display that I'm using. There are other different types of braille displays and other assistive devices that people use. So as companies design accessible apps and websites, these are some of the things to keep in mind. But keep innovating. Don't stop with these things. Keep thinking about new ways for people to access information. And as you do that, don't make assumptions about what disabled people can and can't do. Design for everything to be accessible. I'll share a story. Many years ago, I went to Beijing for the first time, and it was a long flight from San Francisco to Beijing. So when I arrived, I was exhausted and went straight to my hotel room. where I discovered something strange. I picked it up, was holding it in my hand, trying to figure out what it was. It almost felt like a piece of fruit. I asked myself, should I taste it? I was really curious to figure out what it was, but not curious enough to bite into an unknown object. So instead, I took a picture with my phone and texted it to a friend asking, "What is this? Is it safe to eat?" Photo. It was dragon fruit, and we have a photo of dragon fruit. There are many people who would think, don't bother making a photo app accessible. Blind people don't take photos. We do take photos. We do need accessible camera and photo apps. So don't make assumptions. Design for everything to be accessible. The other thing is our bodies are always changing. We deserve dignity and access at every stage in our lives. Next slide. We have a photo with President Obama. He is standing at a table typing on a keyboard. I'm on the other side of the table reading from a Braille computer. I met President Obama at the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. This year, we just celebrated the 30th anniversary of the ADA. President Obama usually communicates by voice, but I access information best through Braille. He graciously switched from voicing to typing so I can access his words. Inclusion is a choice. When you choose inclusion, you role model it for everyone around you. Every time a tech company chooses inclusion, it role models it for its customers, its colleagues, other tech companies. We need more organizations to make technology accessible, especially now during the pandemic. Next slide. And final slide. So one of the main barriers is ableism. I wrote a book describing my life and journey and experiences with ableism. The book is called Haben, the Deaf-Blind Woman Who Conquered Harvard Law. Because again, I didn't overcome my disability. For me, disability was never something to overcome. It was ableism that needed to be overcome. And I hope more people join me in helping to remove ableism from our communities. I want to bring Irene back on screen. Do we have any questions from the community? Let's switch into Q&A. People can send in their questions and we'll try to go through the questions.
Yes, thanks, Haben, for sharing your story. You actually answered one of the questions where people were curious to learn how was it meeting President Obama. And I think you sort of captured that one, but you can add something if you want to. And the next question is, how was your experience in terms of accessibility when you traveled to Africa? So you can share a bit about that.
Travel to Africa. So there are several layers to that. So firstly, I could not take my service dog. My guide dog helps me navigate around obstacles. And we need more countries to pass civil rights legislation protecting service dogs. I believe there's just one guide dog school in Africa right now, in South Africa. Hopefully more communities and more tools will be available for blind people to travel safely and independently. So that was an example of one barrier. There was also ableism people expressing pity, people feeling shame, talking about disability. I wish more people would have disability pride. Everyone has differences. We need to work on removing the barriers that make it difficult for disabled people to work or go to school or participate in their communities.
Thank you, Haben. The next question is, during your time at Harvard, can you share a bit more about the information that you are receiving? Was it accessible? Maybe you can talk about textbooks, your professors communicating with you via email, were they sharing images, or how did you overcome the accessibility barrier on the content side?
Harvard had reached a point by the time I arrived that they were choosing to make the content accessible. So I asked, can you provide me my books in Braille? They provide books in Braille. I asked, can you provide me my exams in Braille? They provided me my exams in Braille. They were not always like this. They were not like this at every Harvard graduate school. And there are many schools throughout the United States that are not like this. When I was looking for colleges to attend, one of the colleges told me, you know, we don't have a Braille computer. We're not sure we're going to be able to provide you Braille. Even if we did get a Braille computer, I don't think it would be on time and it'd probably be very delayed. Are you really sure you can go to college? Maybe you should think about this. They were incredibly discouraging, and I did not go to that college. I know lots of disabled students face this kind of negative attitude, this ableism, when they try to go to school or get a job. And we need communities to get rid of ableism and instead engage in an interactive process and find out, how can we make this accessible? Okay, let's do that. Let's remove these barriers.
Okay, great. Another question we have for you is, do you speak another language other than English?
I know a little bit Tigrinya, which is spoken in Eritrea, Tinnish, a little bit Amharic, and then I studied Spanish when I was in school, and then also some sign language, American Sign Language.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. One more question is, COVID-19 has sort of amplified the whole digital space in terms of indicating where the barriers are, especially for people with disabilities. And even though people with disabilities need the health information more, especially at this time, most people have not been able to access this information. Can you give your insight about accessibility of COVID-19 information and what you would encourage people who are developing content to do?
The pandemic is amplifying all the barriers that existed before the pandemic started. So there are many health organizations that are not using the web content accessibility guidelines. They're posting videos without captions, podcasts without transcripts, images, charts, flyers without any image description. And that denies disabled people critical health information. We really need health organizations, hospitals, all organizations to make their information accessible. And the web content accessibility guidelines are posted online and are available for anyone to access. So we need people to start using these resources. And it doesn't stop there. You'll also need to connect with disabled people, increase hiring of disabled people, make sure disabled people actually test the apps and websites to make sure they're accessible?
No, that's great. We actually have Shadi from the World Wide Web Consortium speaking tomorrow, so during the mobile accessibility session. So I'm sure he'll be able to give people more insight on what mobile accessibility really means. I had another question for you. Someone wants to know, how did you learn how to speak? And you can choose to answer this question.
How did I learn to speak? I have some hearing in the high frequencies, so I learned to speak at a higher register. That's why my voice is like this, and I speak at a higher register.
Thank you. Thank you. Another question for you is on innovations, which is something I'm very passionate about. And there are a lot of innovations globally. And if you look at Africa, there's a lot coming up, especially on the tech space. And of course, most of it is not inclusive. What's your take on innovation and accessibility of innovations?
You know, I think there is innovation in tech and accessibility happening in Africa, but those stories aren't getting attention. They're not being amplified. So I would love for media organizations to dedicate more time to stories from Africa and amplify these stories. Maybe we could have awards and more recognition for those organizations that do the work of making their apps and websites and other tech accessible.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. One final question. Can you take one more question?
Yes, I can take one more.
Okay, all right. Someone wants to know, where in the world would you like to travel next?
I feel like the only correct answer is Kenya. Would you agree, Irene?
Of course. We have to do Kenya, definitely.
Yes. So I've never been to Kenya and I'd love to visit. And we had a fun visit planned. So maybe sometime in the future.
Yes, definitely. I think once we go past the COVID period, we'll definitely plan to have everyone at least come to Kenya and really have a lengthy conversation on digital inclusion. Please go ahead, Haben, and give your closing remarks, and then I'll wrap up.
It was an honor to be here with everyone virtually. Thank you for the questions. Please keep the conversation going. If you felt inspired, allow that emotion to lead to action. Think about one action you are inspired to take. What's a barrier in your community? And develop a plan to remove that barrier so your community can be more inclusive. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you, Haben. That was a very inspiring talk, and I know it's very late in California, so thank you for taking your time to speak to us. I hope people felt inspired, and like you said, we need action because it's time to move forward. I think the amazing thing is that Africa is still developing in terms of technology, so there's an opportunity to bring in the issue of digital accessibility at the onset before most technologies are way too advanced. So I want to say many thanks, Haben, and also many thanks to Mastercard Foundation for making this session possible. Ladies and gentlemen, the main conference sessions have now come to an end. I thank you so much for your patience, for your time, for joining us. I also thank you for your patience, especially when we had the technical difficulties. And as I mentioned, It also gives you an experience of what it takes a person with disability, especially when they're trying to access information and it's not possible. So we definitely apologize, and we ask you to please join us if you're interested. We do have an after session, a networking session in a few minutes. It's going to be on Zoom on our website. Please join us. You'll get a chance to meet some of the speakers who are on the panel. And also at the same time, I want to thank all our speakers, our partners, our sponsors, and all our contributors. And of course, I want to thank our audience, all the participants, and we look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. We have another session tomorrow morning for 2.5 hours, and it will be very, very interesting. So thank you, everybody, and have a blessed day.